Alright, welcome to this video where we're going to talk about how PCOS affects your menstrual cycle and therefore fertility, because this is one of the most common questions I'm asked. So firstly, I'm going to run you through how a normal functioning menstrual cycle works, and then we'll break it down even further, and then we'll look at how PCOS affects things so you completely understand, alright, well, I'm not having a regular cycle due to my PCOS, and I now understand the mechanics. And the reason I do videos like this is because I work with so many women with PCOS. I understand and I start to see the patterns, and I start to see that because there is not that much information out there around PCOS, a lot of women with PCOS don't truly understand how it's affecting them. You don't understand the triggers, you don't understand the causes, causing the symptoms. So I see my role here is just giving you all that information so you really understand this condition that is affecting you so deeply, because then you can find the solutions. So let's look here at this page, and this is a normal functioning menstrual cycle. So the first thing you have to understand is your menstrual cycle is controlled by your brain, and it does this via hormones. So there's a big feedback loop where the brain is talking to the ovaries, and it does that through hormones, and then it's listening to the ovaries to hear where the menstrual cycle is up to. So generally speaking, when we're speaking about the menstrual cycle, we just use like a 28-day standard cycle here. So I know with PCOS you might have shorter cycles, you might have longer cycles, you might not be having a cycle at all. But for this example, we're just going to use an example 28-day cycle. So as we can see here, we're really looking at these four hormones that are controlling the menstrual cycle. Those hormones are LH, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and your two main female sex hormones, which is estrogen and progesterone. So we can see here the cycle days. So we're looking at 1 to 28 days. The ovarian cycle, that is what is actually happening with your follicles. So as you can see here, the follicle here is not matured at all. It starts to mature. But we'll go here and we'll look at LH and FSH. So really we start the menstrual cycle here at FSH. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. So your brain will send that down to your ovaries to stimulate your follicles into growth. Remember, the follicles, that is where your lifetime supply of eggs live. You are born with your lifetime supply of eggs. So we can see at the start of this cycle here in blue, follicle stimulating hormone is the highest hormone. It is the highest hormone in the bloodstream, and that is because your brain is making sure a follicle is growing, is maturing into ovulation. That is the purpose of the menstrual cycle. So as you can see here, follicle stimulating hormone is nice and high. It's high, it's high, it's high. So that follicle, we can see here the ovarian cycle. See how this follicle here is starting to mature? It's starting to get bigger and bigger. Here's your egg here. It's starting to mature. And what you need to know too is you can see a correlation between this maturing follicle and levels of estrogen. So the follicle, the egg starts to mature, estrogen starts to rise. So that is because that follicle is your source of estrogen. So that is where your main source of estrogen comes from within your body. That follicle starts to mature in the first 2 weeks of the cycle. Estrogen levels start to rise. Now, when estrogen reaches a certain point, as I said at the start of this video, your brain works on a feedback loop. So it's always listening to what's going on. So when your brain picks up this estrogen level here is peaked around day 14 of the cycle, it now sends down a surge of this red hormone here, which is luteinizing hormone. So it's that surge of luteinizing hormone around day 14 of your menstrual cycle that actually triggers ovulation. So without that surge of luteinizing hormone, you would not have ovulation. So as we can see here just quickly, follicle stimulating hormone is stimulating these follicles in the maturation. That then causes estrogen levels to rise. And then when estrogen levels reach a certain point, that triggers your brain to send down a surge of luteinizing hormone. And it's that surge of luteinizing hormone that triggers ovulation around day 14 of the cycle. And as we can see, after ovulation, estrogen levels start to fall away dramatically. Luteinizing hormone, because it's done its job now, it falls away dramatically. Follicle stimulating hormone, although had a short surge, it now falls away. But you can see this one hormone here, which is progesterone. So progesterone levels start to rise. Now, why does progesterone levels rise after ovulation? It's because that follicle, as we can see here, that follicle that released its egg, it doesn't die. That follicle now becomes what's called the corpus luteum. the corpus luteum, and that is your source of progesterone. So that is where you get your main source of progesterone from, the corpus luteum after ovulation. And as you can see, that rises, but then as that corpus luteum starts to fade away, progesterone levels start to fall, as do they all, and then that's the end of the cycle. So then it starts again. First week of your cycle is what's called menses. That is where you shed your uterine lining. That is what most women refer to as their period, where you have your bleed, and you start all over again. So here, I like to wrap this all up because everything has a trigger. There's all steps. So you may be looking at this and being like, oh, there is so much information here, Drew. I'm confused. Look, I like to break it down very, very simply. And it's like this. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the follicle. That follicle releases estrogen. When estrogen reaches a certain point, your brain sends down a surge of luteinizing hormone that triggers ovulation. After ovulation, that follicle becomes the corpus luteum, which is your source of progesterone in the second 2 weeks. And then at the end, they all fall away. And then in week 1, menses happens and we start that cycle again. So if we break it down even more simpler, and look at a regular menstrual cycle here, as you can see, once again, you can see the eggs here, the follicles here. One will start to mature. There's ovulation here, so that will go into the fallopian tube waiting for fertilization, if there is one. And as we can see, the pituitary hormones here, pituitary is just a part of the brain, so these, you could just call these brain hormones. As you can see here, follicle stimulating hormone is above luteinizing hormone. Remember, we have to have that so the follicle stimulates and it can develop. But then when ovulation, what triggers ovulation is this surge of luteinizing hormone, and then they both fall away at the last 2 weeks. So that is how a normal functioning menstrual cycle works. But if we look at how PCOS affects this, here's a regular PCOS cycle. So if you're having irregular cycles or not having a cycle at all due to your PCOS, this is the cause. As you can see here, instead of follicle stimulating hormone being higher at the start of the cycle, now we have a luteinizing hormone being higher, and this is the big issue. So when luteinizing hormone is higher at the first 2 weeks, it means that no follicle can mature. If you aren't maturing that follicle, you will not have ovulation. If you're not having ovulation, you cannot fall pregnant, obviously. Then you won't have your progesterone levels as well. So that's why a lot of women with PCOS will have low progesterone levels. It's because if you're not ovulating, you're not producing that corpus luteum after ovulation. So that is the big issue. The start of the cycle, remember how I said I like to break down the menstrual cycle into, little parts. This causes this, causes this, causes this. It all started at the first step. Follicle stimulating hormone causes the follicle to start maturing, which then, releases estrogen. But in the PCOS cycle, this doesn't happen. The follicle stimulating hormone isn't high enough. The ratio. So this is called the ratio of LH to FSH. If you are having irregular cycles, your doctor should test it for this. But basically what's happening is LH is too high, which meaning follicle stimulating hormone cannot do what it's due, and you will see this as an irregular menstrual cycle, or maybe you're not having a menstrual cycle at all. So if we go back to this first image, that blue line will essentially, this red line would be higher than this blue line, and none of this would happen. None of this would happen at all. So now we understand, well, how PCOS affects the menstrual cycle. So now you should be asking, my apologies. Now you should be asking, all right, well, what's triggering that? If you've watched many of my videos, I'm always looking for the cause. I'm always looking for the root cause of the problem. And with this, the root cause is going to be, really it's 2 things. It's insulin resistance and high androgen levels, high male testosterone levels. Because that combination of high insulin and high testosterone causes high, so if I'll just write it here, hopefully it looks okay. High insulin and high test, so high insulin, high test causes this high LH issue. and that's what's driving it. So if you really want to regulate your menstrual cycle, because we know the symptoms of having an irregular menstrual cycle, well, here's how it's twofold. High insulin and high testosterone causes high LH, but then high LH causes even higher testosterone levels. So we know the issues of not having a regular menstrual cycle. Obviously, you're going to have fertility issues. You're going to have dysregularities between estrogen and progesterone. Those two hormones are important for many things: body temperature, mood, obviously body shape, fat storage. Estrogen is important for how you store your fat and how you use your fat. So there's many things that, like many symptoms that are hard to live with, hard to deal with due to this. So really what you want to be doing in terms of your lifestyle is working on the root causes. And here, as I mentioned, here are the root causes. So really, if you're trying to regulate your menstrual cycle, what you are trying to do is regulate your insulin levels and testosterone levels. Now, one of the main causes of high testosterone will be high insulin levels. So that's twofold there. If you work on your insulin levels, you'll also be working on your high testosterone levels, but also your adrenal glands produce testosterone. So you want to be doing everything you can to be reducing inflammation, reducing stress, and also body fat, or what's called adipose tissue, produces testosterone. So obviously that's why your doctor may tell you to lose weight. So really, this is what you want to be doing. You want to be focusing on your diet to reduce insulin levels. You want to be focusing on regular exercise to reduce insulin levels. You want to be focusing on reducing stress and inflammation for testosterone levels. And obviously sleep's important of that. Now, I won't go through all of that because obviously there's specific examples. I can teach you how to do all of those things. But with this video, I really just wanted to teach you how PCOS affects your menstrual cycle, because I speak to so many women every day with PCOS that simply have no idea how it's impacting you. So it's kind of like, looking for a needle in a haystack with a blindfold on, because you just simply don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what's causing it, so then you can't find the solutions. So if you do have any questions about this video, let me know. But in future videos, we'll obviously talk about diet, we'll talk about exercise, supplementation, stress reduction, inflammation reduction, sleep, and all of those type of things. So I hope you enjoyed this video. As I mentioned, any questions at all, let me know, and I'll see you next time.